We recently finished our Fundamental Doctrines series, which was covering all of those essential beliefs that a Muslim must believe in. And we covered that over 8 sessions, I believe, and that is available online, inshallah, if you wish to catch up on that. This is a follow-on series from that. As I mentioned in that previous series multiple times, that what we are doing at the moment is the very basics of Aqeedah, and inshallah, slowly and slowly we will build upon those concepts that we originally learnt. Giving you a bit of a refresher as to why Aqeedah and why this particular topic, and why it's fundamentally important for us to study Aqeedah, to learn it, to teach it, and to understand it as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, which translates as, know that there is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From this particular verse, the key word being فَاعْلَمْ, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What this verse teaches us and shows us is that it is an individual obligation upon every single person to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and know that there is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the most fundamental doctrine, the most fundamental part of Aqeedah. Every single Muslim must concentrate on and must make an active effort to believe and to attain the knowledge regarding that belief as well. Why do we study Aqeedah? We study Aqeedah so that we can fulfill the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this particular verse. And as I've mentioned previously, majority of Aqeedah pertains to the beliefs that we must hold regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what is the difference between the Fundamental Doctrine series that we covered previously and this new series which is titled The 50 Essential Beliefs? The 50 Essential Beliefs. What's the difference between this? In the previous series, I mentioned all of the beliefs that a person must believe in, starting from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the way up until the Day of Judgment. Okay, all of those beliefs were mentioned, and they were mentioned in light of the Quran and the Sunnah. The Quran pertaining to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Sunnah, those things that have been mentioned in the ahadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, that is not sufficient. And you may ask, why is the Quran and the Sunnah not sufficient? Because we live in a particular day and age. If you ask a person going to university or college or even high school, and you ask them, why are you a Muslim? If you ask them a simple question, not who are you? Yes, we are a Muslim. Why are you a Muslim? The most common answer you will hear from them is, number one, I don't really know. And number two, because my parents are Muslim. Okay? These are the two most common answers you will hear from a teenager or maybe even a grown adult at some instances. Why are you a Muslim? The answer to that is either I don't know or because my parents are Muslim. And that is not a correct answer. And that answer is not good enough. Why? If you answer you do not know, then you have failed in the most fundamental obligation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to you, which is فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. That know as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have any partner, and know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. So you failed in the most fundamental obligation that Allah tasked you with. Okay? And if you answer that I am a Muslim because my parents are Muslims, okay, then that answer is also flawed. Why is that flawed? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran in another verse, He says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَإِلَى الرَّسُولِ قَالُوا حَسْبُنَا مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the description of the disbelievers, or those people that when the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam was preaching the Tawhid, the monotheism, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to them in Makkatul Mukarramah, this is what they would reply. That when it is said to them, come to Allah's revelation and to the Messenger. So when they are given the da'wah, when they are given the call to come towards Islam, to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what do they say? They reply, what we found our forefathers practicing is good enough for us. And what we found our forefathers believing in, what we found our forefathers practicing in, that is good enough for us. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reprimands them and He says, would they still do so even if their forefathers had absolutely no knowledge or guidance? Meaning what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying is that this answer, that we are just doing what our forefathers did, is not good enough, is not sufficient. Why? Because what is the possibility of your forefathers having absolutely no knowledge or no guidance? What is the possibility of them acting upon or practicing something that was incorrect? Something that, number one, didn't make any logical sense, or number two, something that was completely invalid. What is the possibility of that? It's a 50-50 possibility, right? They could have been right and they could have been wrong. In this case, where the disbelievers are saying that we are just doing what our forefathers did, they are counting on their forefathers having believed and having the correct creed. But in reality, what was it? That they were worshipping idols. They were worshipping idols. So their belief that they carried on, just assuming that because their forefathers did it, therefore it was right, was an incorrect argument, was an incorrect belief to hold. So when we say we are Muslim, we don't say we are Muslim because our parents are Muslims. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it obligatory upon every sane individual to reach a conclusion themselves, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mawjood, He is present, then you believe in God and you believe in the oneness of God. That is upon every single person. Okay, and we'll discuss that when we get to there with regards to the discussion of the Mukallaf. However, this was the introduction as to why we need to study the science of Aqeedah. In the previous one, I only told you what the Quran says. Now, let me give you a scenario. If you encounter a non-Muslim in college or university, and those of you that are elder, if you encounter a non-Muslim in a workplace, and they ask to you, let's say for example Waqas, prove to me that God exists. I'm an atheist and I don't believe in God. Or I'm a Christian and I believe in the Trinity. Or I'm this and I'm that. Prove to me that God exists. What are you going to do? If Waqas was to stand there and say to Karen, Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say that there is only one God. Is that sufficient? No. Why is that not sufficient? Because Karen already does not believe in the Quran. So for you to quote the Quran to a non-Muslim to prove the existence of God is what we in logic call daw, or circular reasoning. Yes, circular reasoning. It's a concept in logic, and the Arabic term for that is daw. Let me explain to you what circular reasoning means. For example, if Waqas says to Karen and he says that God is one because it says in the Quran. Karen's next question, what's it going to be? Who said the Quran's true? And your answer? God. Okay? So you've gone round in a circle. Why does God exist? God exists because the Quran says God exists. Who told you the Quran is true? God. You've gone round in a circle. That's circular reasoning. And circular reasoning is a fallacy, meaning that's not a comprehensive or even a valid argument. Another example for you to understand is, for example, when we say to the Christians and we say to them, why do you believe Jesus is the Son of God? And they say the Bible tells us. Okay? And then we ask them, who told you that the Bible is true? And they say, Jesus. Okay? Circular reasoning again. So circular reasoning is not a good argument. So now the question arises, if a non-Muslim comes to you and asks you, why do you believe in God? What type of proof or what type of evidence must you give to them? A logical or a rational reason. Okay? A logical argument or a rational argument. That is the only way to convince another person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. Okay? That's the first reason as to why we're covering this in this manner. The second reason, for yourself. Okay? Because the Quran will tell you, okay, you're a Muslim. It may convince you. The Quran may convince you because you believe in Allah and you believe in the Quran. And the Quran tells you, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say that Allah is one. So you believe in that. But if somebody comes along and gives you another logical or somewhat logical argument and tries to disprove that there is no God or God does not exist. For example, an atheist comes to you and challenges you and says these are the particular reasons as to why God does not exist. For example, the most common atheist argument is evil and suffering, which is what? The atheist will come to you and say to you, God does not exist. If God existed, there would not be any evil. Meaning, for example, there would not be people dying of starvation in Yemen. there would not be this tragedy or these tsunamis and earthquakes taking place if a God existed. Okay? But you're a Muslim and you believe in the Quran and you believe in Qul Huwallahu Ahad. But that person came to you and planted a doubt in your mind regarding the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is the solution now to remove that doubt from your head? Is it going back to the Quran? No, because you already believe in the Quran. Okay? The way to remove that doubt from your mind is through logic. And the way to counter that atheist claim is through logic as well. Okay? So that's the reason why we study the science of Aqidah in these two different manners. The first manner that we did in the Fundamental Doctrines, we studied it only based upon rational proofs, textual proofs, what the Quran and Sunnah mentions. Here now, what we're going to cover is the 50 essential beliefs. Those attributes that are necessary, impossible and possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the prophets. And we're going to study them through rational arguments, okay? Because the current climate that we're living in is everything is about rationale. Everything is about logic. Of course, there are some absurd claimants to logic as well. And there are some absurd people coming out with absurd ideas. For example, I watched a video the other day and the person was saying that how do we know that 2 plus 2 equals 4? What if it equals 5? Yes? And they were kind of denying some sort of objective reality. And now, of course, that's an absurd claim. Any sane individual would watch that video and just flick through it straight away and know that somebody's lost the plot. Yes? Because there are particular logical realities that one cannot deny. For example, if I'm sitting here and I say I am sitting on a chair, okay? I can see the chair, I can touch the chair, and I can feel the chair through my senses. Now, if somebody was to come to me and say, Shah Sahib, this is not a chair, this is a potato. Of course, I would laugh at them, wouldn't I? Yes? Because they are denying reality. What you can see through your 5 senses is reality. And the first thing you are taught is حَقَائِقُ الْأَشْيَاءِ ثَابِتَةٌ, that the reality of things are established. So nobody can claim that this chair is a potato. Okay? It is a chair. Okay? These are rational arguments. These are logical reasonings. So through this same formula, we will study the sifat and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that we don't only believe them, but we remove any possible doubt that can come into our minds. Number one. And number two, we can convey the same message to other people through rational arguments. Okay? Now, what was the need? The question arises. What was the need for these rational arguments and these logical proofs? One may say, and you may hear, that in the time of the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the time of the Sahaba, they never used rational proofs and logical reasoning and arguments to prove the existence of God, or to prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears, or to prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-seeing. They never used any of that. Okay? That's an objection. You might hear it. Yes? The simple answer to that objection is, in the time of the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the time of the early generations, their iman and their belief was so firm that nobody could even cast a doubt into their minds. Okay? That's one reason. The second reason being that the science of logic was not widespread amongst the Muslim communities in that time. Okay? 2 reasons. So what happened then? What happened? I'll give you a brief history to the science of logic, and this will enhance your understanding as to why you're studying this and why it is so important. So if you look at the history of the science of logic, it originated from the Greeks. Okay? So majority of the works of logic, the name for logic in Arabic is mantiq. Majority of the works of logic were authored by, for example, Aristotle. He's known as al-Muallim al-Awwal, the first teacher. Aristotle, a very common and famous name. Aristotle. Thereafter came other people who mastered the science of logic. What happened as to how logic got from the Greek world into the Arab world? What happened was, people began translating the works of Aristotle and his likes from Greek into Arabic. And once they were translated into Arabic, they were then widespread amongst the Muslim community. And when the Muslim community began reading these books of Aristotle, or these logical facts and realities that people can't deny, what happened? People read them and said, okay, we believe in Allah and we believe this and we believe that. But how does this fit into our creed? Or how do we make sense of our creed based upon these universal principles of logic? Okay? Universal. So one basic principle is, this chair is a chair, it's not a potato, okay? I can rationally argue that through logical reasoning, okay? I don't think I have to do that because everybody has that sort of common sense to know that this is not a potato, it's a chair. I'm giving you a very basic example, yes? So when these logical arguments became prevalent amongst Muslim societies, the scholars thought, if we do not protect the Muslim creed against these logical and rational debates and arguments that are happening, people will become doubtful in their own creed and their own religion of Islam. Okay? Therefore, what the scholars did, the ulama did, they wrote small booklets, and then they wrote extensive booklets as well, extensive books, commentaries upon those little booklets, proving all of Islamic creed, the most basic of Islamic creed, through rational thought and logical reasoning. Okay? So now you've understood as to why this science is so important. You might now look back and say, Shah Sahab, this happened hundreds and thousands of years ago. What is the importance of learning our creed and our belief through logical reasoning in this day and age right now? And wallahi al-azim, I would say it's more important now than ever to learn your belief, your creed through logical reasoning, because of the amount of filth that is portrayed in our world, and the amount of ideologies that exist, and the amount of people that are targeting Islam through, some of them are targeting through very cheap tactics. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about learned people trying to place doubts in the minds of people about their own creed and their religion as to why they believe in Allah. For example, the biggest and the most prevalent society or community that is against Islam in this matter is the atheists. Okay? Because their whole purpose and their agenda is to move people away from Islam. Okay? And what is our purpose? Our purpose is to bring as many people towards Islam. Okay? And how do we do that in this society? We do that by logically debunking their arguments, number one. Number two, if you think, Shah Sahab, I'm never going to get the opportunity to do that. I don't want to go to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park and argue with people. But why do you need to study it? You need to study it for yourself. So that if anybody ever argues with you rationally or logically regarding your own belief and your faith, you are able to answer them, or at the very least, you are able to protect your own creed. Okay? That was an introduction as to why we're studying this. Now moving on. The author and the book. As was mentioned on the poster, we'll be covering a very famous book known as Risalah fi ilm al-Tawhid, which is a Risalah. A Risalah translates as epistle, and fi ilm al-Tawhid, in the science of monotheism, in the science of creed or monotheism. Tawheed literally translates as monotheism, believing in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a very short Risalah, a very short booklet, written by the great Imam Ibrahim al-Bajuri rahimahullah ta'ala. Let me give you a short introduction to the author before we continue his book. Why? Because sometimes we study books and we know nothing about the author. That is, I believe, somewhat injustice to the author. That if we are taking benefit from the author's work, we should try our best to know something, at the very least, where were they, where they lived, when they were born, when they passed away, about the author, because we had the opportunity to benefit from their work. So Imam Ibrahim al-Bajuri al-Azhari rahimahullah ta'ala, he was from Cairo in Egypt. Okay? He was from Cairo in Egypt. He was born in 1784 and he passed away in 1861. Okay, these are important dates, write them down if you wish. He was born in 1784 and he passed away in 1861. So he wasn't too long ago, about 200, 250 years ago. The Islamic dates are he was born in 1198 Hijri and he passed away in 1277 Hijri. Where was he from? He was from a village known as Bajur. That's why he's known as al-Bajuri. Okay, the resident of the village of Bajur. That's what Bajuri means. Okay, so Bajur, where's Bajur? Bajur is a village located a few hours away from Cairo. Cairo is the capital of Egypt. And Cairo is the place where the Azhar Masjid and the Azhar University is as well. He authored many works and he reached one of the highest stations that you can reach in the Azhar University, which is Shaykh al-Azhar. Okay? Meaning he was the grand teacher of Azhar. Imam Ibrahim al-Bajuri rahimahullah ta'ala. He authored many works. The one that we're going to be studying inshallah is one of his works, and he authored many other works. For example, he wrote Hawashi, marginalias, on al-Barahin, on Jawharat al-Tawhid, on Shama'il of Imam al-Tirmidhi, on the Qasidat al-Burda of Imam al-Busiri, on Sulam al-Murawraq, which is a book in Mantiq. Okay, so he was a prolific author, a writer, and he was also the grand Shaykh, the grand Imam of Azhar. That's a little bit about Imam Ibrahim al-Bajuri. Why did he write this work? That's the question. Why did he write this work? He says in his own introduction that he writes this work because a few of his friends, a few of his colleagues and companions asked him that could you write a work which is short, a work which is sweet, and a work which encompasses all the essential beliefs that a Muslim must uphold and believe in with logical reasoning. That's all the friends asked for. And wallahi al-azim, Imam Ibrahim al-Bajuri penned this work in such a concise manner and being very simplistic and very easy to understand that scholars after him said that this work should be memorized by heart. That's how important of a work it is, and that's how easy and comprehensive the work is. It includes everything that a person must believe in. So, what does he do? He mentions all of the 50 essential beliefs, and after mentioning the belief, he mentions the reason for that belief, a logical reason, okay, which is known as the dalil, okay. A dalil, it can be translated as proof or evidence, okay. And there's two types of dalil, a summary of what I've mentioned earlier. There's two types of dalil. Dalil meaning proof or evidence. The first one is dalil aqli, okay. Dalil aqli, which is what? Which is a rational proof or a rational evidence. A dalil aqli is a rational proof or a rational evidence. The second type you have is a dalil naqli. What's a dalil naqli? A dalil naqli is a textual proof or a textual evidence. Now these are two important terms because I might use them throughout the lectures inshallah, so try to remember them. Dalil aqli and dalil naqli. Dalil aqli is a rational proof or rational evidence, and a dalil naqli is a textual proof or a textual evidence. In this work, the author suffices with just mentioning the rational proofs only. He avoids mentioning the textual proofs, not that he doesn't believe they're important, he avoids them to make the text even more concise, okay? But inshallah, as I commentate upon the work, I will also mention the textual proofs for each belief as well as the rational proofs for them as well. Again, there are a further two types of dalil, a further two types of evidence. What's that? The first one is known as dalil ijmali, and the second is dalil tafsili. Dalil ijmali means a comprehensive proof. Dalil ijmali means a comprehensive proof, and dalil tafsili means an extensive proof. So dalil ijmali is a comprehensive proof, and a dalil tafsili is an extensive proof. What does that mean? That means, for example, if I ask you for an evidence, you can give me a proof, a reason, an evidence, a basic, simple, short one. For example, if I ask you, why does God exist? You say to me, because creation exists, therefore God exists. That's a dalil, okay? That's a proof and an evidence for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's in its most basic format. Even though it's comprehensive, it's still very basic. Now, if I continue to question you and go into detail regarding this proof, that becomes tafsil. Meaning that becomes a dalil tafsili, an extensive proof. So which type of the two proofs must every individual, every lay person know? Every single Muslim is obliged to know a dalil ijmali, a comprehensive proof. A proof which is sufficient enough to get rid of any doubts that may occur in his mind or her mind. Okay? And enough to safeguard his own belief. That's a dalil ijmali. Every single Muslim is obliged to know that much. Then when you go into the further details and the intricacies of these proofs and details, that is not necessary upon every single person. Who is that important upon and who is that necessary upon? That is necessary upon the ulama, the scholars, the learned people, and amongst them, in particular, the debaters. Those people who will go out and debate non-Muslims or speak to non-Muslims, or those people who are known as da'is, meaning propagators of the religion, people who will go out and preach religion to others, they must know the extensive proofs for every belief that they hold. So that when they go out there and they try to convince another person of Islam, that other person does not counter-argue them and win them in the argument, okay? Due to their lack of knowledge, not because they were right, okay? That's very important to remember. Nobody can win an argument in disproving the existence of Allah, okay? Because it's invalid, okay? The only time an atheist may win an argument against a believer is if the believer is not prepared and the believer has not done his research and his study in his own belief, okay? So the two types of dalil. Dalil ijmali, dalil tafsili. A comprehensive proof and an extensive proof. Every Muslim is required to know a comprehensive proof regarding everything that they believe. Okay, and that's what we will be covering inshallah. So the author begins in his introduction and he mentions the reason for writing the book, and he says, I've tried my best to make this work as short and sweet as possible. I've tried to include everything that is possible for Allah and the Prophets, everything that is impossible for Allah and the Prophets, and everything that is possible for Allah and the Prophets. Then he further states, and this is a very key discussion before we begin the book. He says, يجب على كل مكلف أن يعرف ما يجب في حقه تعالى وما يستحيل وما يجوز. He says that every accountable soul, that is every sane soul possessed of reason by having come of age through the attainment of puberty, is obliged by sacred law, al-Sharia, to know what is rationally necessary for him Most High, what is possible for him Most High, and what is impossible for him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is his discussion before mentioning the beliefs. What he is saying is, he's telling you the importance of what he is about to mention. And the reason why he's mentioning it. He's saying that every mukallaf, every legally responsible person, which includes every single one of us in this room today, yes? Every single person is obliged by the Sharia and by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to know what I am about to mention. What is that? I am going to tell you those things that are impossible for Allah. I'm going to tell you those things that are necessary for Allah. I'm going to tell you those things that are possible for Allah. I'm going to tell you those things which are impossible for the Prophets. I'm going to tell you those things which are necessary for the Prophets, and I'm going to tell you those things which are possible for the Prophets. This amount of knowledge is necessary upon every mukallaf. That's what he mentions here. Now let's look at it in detail. His first thing that he mentions is يَجِبُ عَلَى كُلِّ مُكَلَّفٍ. It is necessary upon every mukallaf. The word mukallaf in the Arabic language comes from the masdar of taklif, which means to burden. Okay? And what is this? A mukallaf is a person that has been burdened with something. And in this instance, this is a burden or a responsibility that Allah has placed upon you. So you are legally responsible. That's one way of translating mukallaf. A legally responsible person. Who has given you that responsibility? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through legally, meaning through the Sharia, Allah has obliged you or made you responsible for this particular thing. An easier way to understand is, for example, we say, Salah is fard upon who? A Muslim, a person who is an adult, meaning he's reached the ages of puberty, etc., etc. You place all these conditions. Those are all conditions for taklif. Meaning for a person to be classified or classed as a mukallaf, these conditions must be fulfilled. In a similar manner, when he says that it is necessary upon every mukallaf, every legally responsible person to know the following things. There are conditions for a person to become mukallaf. What are the conditions? There's three conditions. The first condition in this instance, and every subject or every science or every issue has its own mukallaf, meaning the conditions for taklif. For example, a person who is not married, he is not obliged to learn the rulings of nikah, because he's not married yet. But when he is about to get married or he is married, now it is obligatory upon him to learn those masail of nikah and talaq. In a similar manner, somebody who does not own a business and does not regularly transact in businesses, that person is not mukallaf, legally responsible to know the masail or the rulings pertaining to buyu', to transactions and contractual agreements. He's not legally responsible to know that. But as soon as he starts a business, or as soon as he gets involved into a business, now he is legally responsible to know that. Okay? So that's what we mean by taklif. And every science, every topic has its own conditions. So in this topic of aqeedah, in knowing the essential attributes of Allah and the Prophet ﷺ, what are the conditions of becoming a mukallaf? Or what are the conditions of being legally responsible? 3 conditions. The first one is that the person must possess Islam. Okay? Meaning the person must be a Muslim. We cannot, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sharia will not oblige a non-Muslim to know these things. It is only obliged upon the Muslim, upon the believer. Yes, the non-Muslim is obliged to search for God and to search for the truth. That's a different obligation. But the Muslim is obliged to know these attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and know the dala'il, the proofs and evidences for them. First condition, Islam. The second condition is sanity. The second condition to become a mukallaf in this field is sanity, meaning the person must be sane. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not make an insane person legally responsible for these things. Okay? So a person must be sane, meaning their senses must be working and their intellectual capacity must be in order for them to even be able to grasp or study and learn these concepts. If they are unable to do that, then they are not responsible. Okay? Meaning if the person is insane, or for example, a person is in a constant state of coma, etc., etc., the person would not be classed, they won't come into the category of being sane because they don't have the senses, which the senses are not working at the moment. Okay? So a person would not be obliged. That's the second condition. The third condition is maturity. Okay? Maturity, which means a person who is not mature will not be obliged to study or learn these things, and they won't be sinful if they don't. For example, any child under the ages of puberty is not obliged to know this, just as any child under the age of puberty is not obliged to pray salah. Any child under the age of puberty is not obliged to give zakat, even if they have money. All of these things come with this particular clause, which is that the person who is mukallaf, who is legally responsible, must be mature. These are the only 3 conditions, that's it. So the first one is Islam, the person must be a Muslim. The second one, the person must possess sanity, meaning they must be sane. And the third one is the person must possess maturity or be mature. Once these 3 conditions are met, you now become a mukallaf. You now become legally responsible. Legally responsible for what? You become legally responsible to know the 50 essential beliefs. And if you look at the 3 conditions and you look at yourself, that will be your answer. Are you legally responsible? Yes or no? Majority of you, the answer would be yes. You are legally responsible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to know these things. Okay? That's the first thing I want to mention. The second thing is regarding the categories of aqeedah. We mentioned this previously in our previous introduction, and it's always good to recap. The 3 categories of aqeedah. The first one, ilahiyat. The second one, nubuwat. And the third one, sam'iyat. Okay? Ilahiyat, nubuwat and sam'iyat. Ilahiyat are those set of beliefs and creed pertaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nubuwat are those beliefs which pertain to the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the third one is sam'iyat, those things which are heard, meaning from the Quran or the Sunnah. Those are the beliefs pertaining to eschatology, etc., etc., the Day of Judgment, the Hawd, the Sirat, etc., all of these things, which we discussed in detail in our previous series. This series and this book only deals with the first 2. It only deals with ilahiyat and sam'iyat, the beliefs pertaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the beliefs pertaining to the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's all the author mentions here, because a lot of the sam'iyat are not things which you can deduce logically. Meaning if somebody asks you, can you prove to me regarding the Hawd, al-Kawthar, or they say to you, prove to me regarding the Sirat, that it will happen. You can't logically prove that because it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, and therefore we believe. But why do we believe in that? We believe in that because we believe in God. Why do we believe in God? We believe in God because it's logically correct to believe that there exists a God, etc. So that is a long argument, and we believe in all of these things, the sam'iyyat, because we believe Allah and we believe in the attributes of Allah, and we know that Allah will never lie. So if Allah has told us a particular thing, so we must believe it. In a similar manner, we believe that the messengers cannot lie. So if the messengers cannot lie and the Prophet ﷺ informed us of a particular thing, we will believe in that thing because it has to be true, because it's impossible for a prophet to lie. Okay, just giving you a quick overview of what you should be expecting in the coming weeks, inshallah. Okay, so the author only focuses on the first two categories of aqeedah, only on ilahiyat and sam'iyyat. How does he do this? He does this by mentioning the 50 essential beliefs. Now, you probably heard me say this word a couple of times, this phrase, and you're probably thinking, Shah, what does this actually mean? Let me explain to you. There are things which are necessary, there are things which are impossible, and there are things which are possible. Okay? 3 categories. Write these down. Things which are possible, things which are necessary, and things which are impossible. Every single thing that exists, or every single thing that does not exist, falls into one of these categories. Okay? It's either going to be necessary, or it's going to be impossible, or it's going to be possible. Let me give you an example of each so you can write it alongside. What is necessary? Okay? The existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is necessary. That's why we say Allah is wajibul wujud, meaning His existence is necessary. Okay? That's an example of something which is necessary. Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wajibul wujud? We will discuss that further. Okay? But here, just think of it as an example. So, from those things which are necessary is the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is impossible? What is impossible? Impossible is for Allah, for there to exist a partner of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is an example of something which is impossible. For there to exist a partner of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is an impossibility. Okay? It's muhal, it's mustahil. Okay? That's an example for that. The third example is of a possible. An example of possible is that it is possible that it can rain. That's a chance, it's a possibility. Is it necessary that it will rain? For example, today. Okay? Possibilities are endless. There's so many possibilities, you can't enumerate them. For example, will the sun set today? It's possible. If Allah wills, it might not set today. Okay? Will it rain today? It's possible. These are all examples of possibilities. Will I finish this lecture today, or will I keep going? It's possible. I may finish it in 5 minutes, or I may continue going for another 40. All of these are possibilities, and the number and the amount of possibilities are endless. So 3 categories: that which is necessary, that which is impossible, and that which is possible. Okay, those are the English terms. Let me tell you the Arabic terms as well. It's always good to familiarize yourself with the Arabic terms as well. The Arabic term for necessary is wajib. Okay, it's a common word we use as well. Wajib, necessary. The word for impossible is either, there's 2. It's either muhal or mustahil. Okay? Muhal is easier because we use this in our own language, in Urdu and Punjabi as well. That this particular ye cheez muhal hai, and it's impossible for it to happen. So muhal or mustahil. And for possible, the Arabic term is mumkin. Mumkin. And we use that in Urdu as well. Ye baat mumkin hai. Ye mumkin hai ki aaj barish ho ke nahi. Okay? Mumkin, meaning that it's possible it will rain, or it's also possible that it may not rain. So 3 words: wajib, muhal, and mumkin. Necessary, impossible, and possible. So what the author does, he finds all of those attributes which are necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of those attributes which are impossible for Allah, and all of those attributes which are possible for Allah. Then he moves on to the next chapter, and he finds all of those attributes which are possible, which are necessary for prophets. Then he gets those attributes which are impossible for prophets, and then he gets those attributes which are possible for prophets. And he divides them. How does he divide them? There are 20, you can write this down. There are 20 attributes which are necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So from those which are wajib, from those attributes which are necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are 20 such attributes. So 20 attributes necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then another 20 which are impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So 20 necessary for Allah, 20 impossible for Allah. And then there's one attribute which is possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or one thing which is possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So 20 necessary attributes, 20 impossible attributes, and one possible attribute. That gives us a total number of 41. 41 attributes here. Okay? And that is all within the chapter of Ilahiyat, beliefs pertaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 41 attributes. Let me go over it again. 20 necessary, 20 impossible, and one possible. Then he moves on to the next chapter, which is regarding the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he mentions 4 attributes which are necessary for the prophets. So 4 attributes which are necessary for the prophets, 4 attributes which are impossible for the prophets. So 4 necessary, 4 impossible, and 1 possible. That gives us a total number of 9. 41 plus 9 equals 50. And that gives us the number 50 essential attributes. So for the prophets, let me go over it one more time. 4 attributes which are necessary for the prophets, 4 attributes which are impossible for the prophets, and 1 attribute or 1 characteristic which is possible for the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That gives you the total number of 50 attributes. Every single attribute is an essential attribute. Why do we call it an essential attribute? We call it an essential attribute because it is obligatory upon every single person to know this attribute or know this characteristic and believe in it as well. Okay, that's why they're called the 50 essential attributes. Let me give you an example of some of them and we will conclude over here, and inshallah next week we can begin. So for example, when we say there are 20 necessary and 20 impossible, you're probably thinking, how am I'm going to struggle learning 50 different attributes? What the easy part is that the 20 which are necessary and the 20 which are impossible are opposites of one another. Okay? So when we say, for example, the first attribute which is necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wujud, existence. I'm just giving you an example. We're going to cover this in detail next week. Wujud, which is existence. That is necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you believe that it is necessary for Allah to exist, what must you now believe that it's impossible for Allah to not exist? Okay? So if you're believing wujud, existence for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you prove that it is necessary for God to exist, you must also now believe and prove that it is impossible for God to not exist. Okay? So the opposite. So 20 are necessary attributes and the opposite of them form the 20 impossible attributes. Another example, for example, if we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qadeem, or we believe qidam for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is pre-eternality, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have a beginning. If we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have a beginning, we must also believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everlasting, etc. All of these attributes. For example, if you believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Sami', okay, meaning He subhanahu wa ta'ala is all hearing, you must also believe that it is impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be deaf. Because if you believe necessarily that He hears everything, you must also believe that it's impossible for God to be deaf. Okay? So the 20 necessary attributes and the 20 impossible attributes. And in a similar manner for the prophets. For example, if you believe for the prophets that the Prophet ﷺ, it is necessary for them to speak the truth. It is necessary for them to speak the truth. You must also now believe that it is impossible for the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lie. So sidq and kadhib, the opposites. Okay? That is what forms the 50 essential attributes and the 50 essential beliefs. Insha'Allah, next week we will start and we will go through them one at a time, insha'Allah. Try to keep today as short and sweet as possible because it's just an introduction. From next week it's going to become very logical. Yes? So please bring your thinking hats. I'm going to be talking about ontological arguments and the first cause argument, and this argument is going to become very philosophical. So maybe do some research into philosophy before you come. But let me give you an example. For example, we'll go through how does the author go through the book. He'll give you the example, he'll give you the attribute. For example, he will say al-wujud. Then he'll say, wujud is necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he'll give you the necessary attribute. Straight after that, he will give you the attribute which is impossible for Allah. And he will say, therefore, non-existence is impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he'll say, وَالدَّلِيلُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. And the proof of this is so and so. So for example, he will say that the proof for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the existence of creation. That's the proof for God's existence. How does this prove the existence of God? That is what I will explain inshallah next week. And in a similar manner, he goes through all the 50 attributes, mentioning the attribute which is necessary, mentioning the attribute which is impossible, and giving you a rational proof as to why this attribute must be necessary and why the other one must be impossible. What I will do inshallah is facilitate or add to the rational proofs, the textual proofs as well, inshallah, through the commentary over here. That's what we'll be doing from next week, inshallah.